The sun beat down on my back, a warm, comforting weight as I sank deeper into the bubbling water. Steam curled around me, carrying the scent of chlorine and the faintest hint of jasmine from the flowering bush I'd planted near the jacuzzi. Finally, a perfect Saturday. The kind where the to-do list could wait, and the only obligation was to exist in a state of pure, unadulterated relaxation. I closed my eyes, letting the jets massage the tension from my shoulders, a knot I'd been carrying since Karen Johnson moved in next door. Karen. Just the name tasted like sour milk in my mouth. From the moment she'd arrived, her presence had been a low-grade hum of discomfort, a constant, irritating buzz. It started small, subtle things, lingering stares, suspiciously timed lawnmower sessions whenever I was outside, and the constant, unsubtle repositioning of her security camera to, as she put it, get a better view of the street. But we both knew the street wasn't what she was interested in. She was interested in me. I tried to ignore it, to rise above the petty annoyances. I'd built a good life for myself and my wife, Sarah. We worked hard, we contributed to the community, and we deserved to enjoy the fruits of our labor. This house, this jacuzzi, this moment of peace, it was all hard-earned. But Karen seemed determined to chip away at it, to inject her brand of poison into our little slice of paradise. There were the thinly veiled concerns about property values, the pointed questions about my background, as if my background was any of her business, and the endless complaints about, well, everything. The music was too loud, even when it was off, the garbage cans were too close to the property line, they weren't, and apparently, my laughter was disturbing the peace. Sarah told me to ignore her, to not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. She's looking for attention, Peter, she'd say, her voice laced with weariness. Don't give it to her. And I tried. I really did. But it was hard to ignore the feeling of being constantly watched, constantly judged. It felt like living under a microscope, every move scrutinized, every breath analyzed. The bubbling of the jacuzzi usually helped me tune it out. The rhythmic pulses, the warm water, the sunshine, it was my sanctuary, my escape. But even here, I couldn't completely shake the feeling that Karen was lurking, watching, waiting for an opportunity to pounce. I glanced over at the fence that separated our yards, half expecting to see her beady eyes peering through the slats. Thankfully, it was clear. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax again, to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have a peaceful afternoon. The sun was warm, the water was perfect, and for the time being, Karen was nowhere to be seen. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the tension slowly drain away. It was a fragile peace, I knew, but it was peace nonetheless. This house was ours, this yard was ours, and this jacuzzi was ours. And for the moment, at least, it felt like nothing could take that away. I was grateful for that small comfort, a moment of reprieve before the inevitable storm that Karen seemed determined to brew. I submerged my head, enjoying the muffled sound of the bubbles, trying to create a soundproof bubble around my mind, free from her negativity. I needed this rest. I resurfaced, gasping for air, a droplet clinging to my eyelashes. That brief underwater immersion had been surprisingly refreshing. I stretched, feeling the satisfying pop of my spine, and leaned back against the molded seat. The sun was still high in the sky, promising several more hours of glorious warmth. Maybe I'd even convince Sarah to join me later. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a strange reflection on the surface of the water. But then I saw the telltale swirl, the unnatural, sickly green hue spreading rapidly across the jacuzzi. Panic seized me, a cold, clammy hand gripping my heart. My eyes darted to the fence. And there she was. Karen. Standing on her side of the property line, a smug, triumphant look plastered across her face. In her hands, she held an empty plastic container, its label obscured by the distance. But I knew. I knew she had poured something into my jacuzzi. What the hell did you do? I yelled, my voice raw with fury. She didn't answer. She just stood there, a grotesque caricature of suburban righteousness, her lips curled into a wicked smile. The green liquid continued to spread, now transforming the water into something resembling toxic waste. The smell, initially faint, began to intensify, a harsh chemical odor that stung my nostrils. I tried to stand, to get out of the jacuzzi, but my legs felt heavy. Unusually heavy. Like they were filled with lead. A strange tingling sensation spread through my limbs, making them feel numb and unresponsive. Fear turned to terror. This wasn't just some prank. This was something far more sinister. "Karen, what did you put in here?" I demanded, my voice trembling. She finally spoke, her voice dripping with venom. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "This isn't your neighborhood. You're polluting everything." Her words were a knife twisting in the wound. All the subtle jabs, the veiled insults, the constant harassment, it all culminated in this moment of blatant, unadulterated hatred. I was more than just an annoyance to her. I was a threat. A blight on her perfect, pristine world. I struggled to move, to escape the increasingly toxic water. But the paralysis was worsening, spreading from my legs to my arms. My fingers twitched uselessly. My head began to swim. The chemical smell was overpowering, making it difficult to breathe. Karen continued to watch, her eyes gleaming with a malevolent satisfaction. She was enjoying this. She was reveling in my helplessness. I was trapped, vulnerable, and at her mercy. All because of the color of my skin. All because she believed I didn't deserve to enjoy the simple pleasure of relaxing in my own backyard. The green tide was rising, both literally and figuratively. It was engulfing me, body and soul, threatening to drag me down into a pit of despair and helplessness. I had to get out. I had to fight. But my body was failing me. My strength was ebbing away. With a supreme effort, I managed to croak out a single word, "Sarah." It was a plea for help, a desperate cry in the face of impending disaster. I hoped she would hear me. I prayed she would come. Because I knew, with chilling certainty, that if she didn't, I was going to die. I watched Karen laugh, it's a sound I will never forget. The sound of Karen's laughter echoed in my ears, a shrill, grating symphony of hate. It was the soundtrack to my nightmare, a constant reminder of her audacity, her cruelty, her utter lack of humanity. My body was becoming increasingly unresponsive. The tingling sensation had morphed into a burning numbness, as if my limbs were slowly being dipped in liquid nitrogen. The green liquid swirled around me, a grotesque parody of the soothing jacuzzi water I had so enjoyed just moments before. The chemical smell was overwhelming, burning my eyes and making it difficult to breathe. I tried to focus, to think clearly, but my mind was becoming clouded, sluggish. I had to figure out what she had put in the water. Was it a poison? A paralytic agent? Something designed to cause long-term damage? I had no idea. All I knew was that it was working. And it was working fast. I tried to yell again, to scream for Sarah, but my voice was weak, barely a whisper. My throat felt constricted, as if someone was tightening a noose around my neck. The paralysis was spreading to my face, making it difficult to speak, to swallow, even to blink. I was trapped. Immobilized. Exposed. In my own backyard. By my own neighbor. All because of her hatred. All because she couldn't stand the sight of a black man enjoying the fruits of his labor. The sun, which had been so comforting just moments before, now felt like a spotlight, highlighting my vulnerability, exposing me to Karen's hateful gaze. I felt a wave of shame wash over me, a sense of humiliation that I couldn't shake. Why was I allowing her to do this to me? Why was I allowing her to rob me of my dignity? I tried to summon my anger, to fuel my fight, but the paralysis was too strong. It had seeped into my mind, numbing my emotions, stealing my will to resist. I glanced at the gate leading to the front yard, hoping against hope that Sarah would appear. She was usually home on Saturdays, tending to her garden or working on her latest art project. But what if she had gone out? What if she was running errands? What if she was simply inside, unaware of the horror unfolding in the backyard? The thought filled me with despair. I was alone. Utterly alone. At the mercy of a woman who clearly wanted to see me suffer. I looked back at Karen. She was still standing there, her arms crossed, her expression one of unadulterated glee. She was enjoying my torment. She was savoring my helplessness. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sight of her, the smell of the chemicals, the feeling of paralysis creeping through my body. I tried to focus on Sarah's face, on the sound of her laughter, on the memory of her touch. I needed something to hold on to, something to remind me that there was still good in the world, that there was still hope. I thought about our future. The trips we wanted to take, the family we wanted to start. Each thought gave me a little bit of strength. Enough to keep me going. Time seemed to stretch and distort, each second an eternity. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the jacuzzi into a miniature greenhouse. The chemical smell was nauseating, making my stomach churn. I could feel myself slipping away, losing consciousness. Black spots danced before my eyes. Then, I heard it. A faint, distant sound. Sarah's voice. She was calling my name. Peter. Peter, are you out here? Hope surged through me, a lifeline in the drowning darkness. I tried to answer her, to call back, but my voice was still weak, barely audible. Here. I managed to croak out, the sound swallowed by the wind. Sarah's voice grew louder, closer. Peter. What's going on? I smell something terrible. I heard the gate creak open. Then, Sarah was there. Standing at the edge of the jacuzzi, her eyes wide with horror. Peter. Oh my God, what happened? She rushed to my side, her face etched with concern. She saw Karen standing by the fence, her expression unchanged. Sarah turned to me, her voice trembling. Peter, what did she do? I couldn't speak. I could only gesture weakly towards Karen. Sarah followed my gaze. Her eyes narrowed, her face hardening. All the kindness, all the gentleness, vanished, replaced by a fierce, protective anger. You, she screamed at Karen, her voice filled with righteous fury. What did you do to him? Karen just smirked. He doesn't belong here, she repeated, her voice laced with venom. He's polluting everything. Sarah didn't waste any time arguing. She immediately grabbed a garden hose and began spraying me with water, trying to dilute the chemicals. Peter, can you move? She asked, her voice urgent. I shook my head weakly. Can't feel legs. Sarah's face paled. She knew this was serious. She immediately called 911, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. My neighbor poisoned my husband. He's paralyzed. Please, send help. While she waited for the ambulance, Sarah continued to spray me with water, desperately trying to wash away the toxins. She spoke to me in soothing tones, telling me to stay calm, to keep breathing, to hold on. Her presence, her touch, her voice, they were my anchor, my lifeline. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't defeated. I focused on her face, on her unwavering determination, and drew strength from her love. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, I heard the sirens. The sound grew louder and louder, until the ambulance pulled up in front of the house. Paramedics rushed into the backyard, their faces grim. They quickly assessed the situation, carefully lifting me out of the jacuzzi and onto a stretcher. As they carried me towards the ambulance, I saw Karen standing by the fence, still smirking. Sarah glared at her, her eyes burning with hatred. You're going to pay for this, she said, her voice low and menacing. You're going to pay for what you did to my husband. As the ambulance doors slammed shut, I caught a glimpse of Sarah's face. She looked determined, resolute. I knew she would fight for me. She would fight for justice. And she wouldn't rest until Karen was brought to justice. I squeezed her hand weakly, grateful for her love and her strength, and braced myself for the unknown. At that moment I knew this ordeal was far from over. I was hoping this would be the end of Karen's reign of terror. The world swam back into focus in the sterile white of the hospital room. Beeping machines, the hushed voices of nurses, and the throbbing ache in my limbs replaced the toxic green nightmare of the jacuzzi. Sarah sat beside me, her hand gripping mine, her eyes red-rimmed but filled with a steely resolve. The doctors were running tests, trying to identify the substance Karen had used and assess the extent of the damage. They weren't optimistic. The paralysis was severe, and they couldn't guarantee a full recovery. It's some kind of experimental pesticide, one of the doctors explained grimly. Highly toxic. We're doing everything we can to counteract the effects, but it's going to be a long road. Hearing those words, long road, felt like a punch to the gut. My life, which had been so full of promise just days before, was now hanging by a thread. My mobility, my health, my future, all jeopardized by one woman's hateful act. The police had taken Karen into custody. Sarah had given them a detailed statement, recounting Karen's history of harassment and her blatant racism. The evidence was mounting against her, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Karen was a master manipulator, skilled at playing the victim, at twisting the truth to suit her own narrative. Days turned into weeks. I was confined to the hospital bed, undergoing grueling physical therapy, trying to regain some semblance of control over my body. The progress was slow, agonizingly slow. Some days, I felt like giving up, like succumbing to the despair that threatened to engulf me. But then I would look at Sarah, at her unwavering devotion, at her unyielding determination, and I would find the strength to keep fighting. She spent every waking moment by my side, researching treatments, contacting lawyers, and tirelessly advocating for my recovery. The legal battle was just beginning. Our lawyer, a sharp, tenacious woman named Ms. Davis, was confident that we had a strong case. But she warned us that it would be a long, arduous process, filled with legal maneuvering and emotional turmoil. Karen Johnson is going to fight this every step of the way, Ms. Davis explained. She's going to deny everything, blame you, and try to paint herself as the victim. Be prepared for a smear campaign. I knew she was right. Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She would use every weapon in her arsenal, lies, manipulation, and blatant racism, to try to escape justice. The media got wind of the story, and soon our lives were under a microscope. News reporters camped outside the hospital, eager to get a glimpse of the racist Karen and the victimized black man. The online comments were even worse, a cesspool of hate and misinformation. Sarah and I tried to ignore the noise, to focus on my recovery and the legal battle. But it was hard. The constant scrutiny, the hateful comments, the fear that Karen would somehow escape justice, it all took a toll. I lay in my hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the future held. Would I ever walk again? Would I ever be able to enjoy a peaceful moment in my own backyard? Would Karen ever be held accountable for her actions? The answers were uncertain. But one thing was clear, I wouldn't give up. I would fight for my recovery, I would fight for justice, and I would fight for my right to live a life free from hate and discrimination. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for all who had experienced similar hate. Months later, the courtroom was packed. The air crackled with tension as the jury filed in, their faces grim. I sat in my wheelchair, Sarah by my side, my heart pounding in my chest. The trial had been a grueling ordeal, filled with painful testimony and inflammatory rhetoric. Karen had denied everything, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, a tragic accident. Her lawyer had even tried to argue that I had somehow provoked her, that my very presence in the neighborhood was a threat to her safety and well-being. But the evidence was overwhelming. The police had found the empty container of pesticide in Karen's garage. Witnesses had testified to her history of racist behavior. And Sarah had bravely recounted the events of that horrific day, her voice breaking with emotion. The jury foreman stood, cleared his throat, and read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Johnson, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with tears. Relief washed over me, a wave so powerful it almost knocked me out of my chair. Justice had been served. Karen was sentenced to 15 years in prison. As she was led away, she turned to me, her eyes filled with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll get you for this." I didn't respond. I simply stared at her, my face impassive. Her threats no longer held any power over me. I had faced her hatred, I had survived her attack, and I had emerged victorious. The road to recovery was still long, but I was determined to get back on my feet. With Sarah's unwavering support and the expert care of my doctors, I slowly began to regain my strength and mobility. The jacuzzi was gone, destroyed by the chemicals. But I knew I would rebuild. I would reclaim my backyard, my peace of mind, and my right to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. In the aftermath of the trial, our community rallied around us. Neighbors who had once been silent, fearful of Karen's influence, now offered their support and solidarity. They organized fundraisers to help pay for my medical expenses and offered to help rebuild the jacuzzi. I learned a valuable lesson during that ordeal, that even in the face of unimaginable hatred, there is still hope. That even in the darkest of times, there is still light to be found. That love and justice will ultimately prevail. I am still in therapy and have been dealing with the emotional scars of Karen's actions. I will never forget what happened, but I refuse to let it define me. I refuse to let hatred win. Instead, I will use my experience to advocate for justice, to speak out against racism, and to promote love and understanding in the world. I plan on making sure what happened to me never happens again. Life isn't perfect, but I am grateful for the life I have and for the love of my wife Sarah. She is my rock and the reason I am still here today.